Immigration to Germany has a negative impact on public safety. Women and girls are affected by this especially. Welcome, Andrew Hammel, lawyer, journalist and author, to Riks Europe.
Thank you.
So this is one of the headlines regarding this particular subject. I know you've been very critical. You've written a lot about this subject. And you've also said to have predicted this problem. So how were you able to predict this? And what were the reactions when you would speak of your predictions in the past?
Well, sure. I've lived in Germany for 2 decades, and I saw the large migrant influx of 2015, 2016. In total, about 1.3 million people came in, and about 900,000 to a million of them were young males between the ages of 19 and 34. And we saw them, they were spread all over Germany because Germany spreads out migrants so that no one city has to take them all. And you could just see these people hanging around. They didn't know any German. Many of them were illiterate in their own languages. And they were suddenly in a country where cheap alcohol, you can buy a bottle of grain alcohol for only €5 on any street corner. And obviously women in Germany dress completely differently than they do in places like Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and even Iran, which is where many of these people were coming from. And so anybody could have predicted that there was going to be trouble here because these men had no experience with alcohol, no experience with dating, no experience with interacting with females outside their family, and there were a huge number of them and nowhere near enough resources to try to counsel them all.
What is it that do you think contributes to the fact that the migrants are vastly represented in the numbers of violence towards German women? Is it a lack of integration or is it a culture clash? What do you think are the reasons for this?
I think it's a combination of many of those factors. What just happened in 2024 was the Zürich newspaper, the New Zürich Zeitung. It's a Swiss newspaper, which is important. German newspapers were not interested and didn't want this data. They found out that from 2015 to 2023, failed asylum seekers, often failed or sometimes, they did have status, committed 8,000 sexual assaults against women in Germany. This was a startling number. It was produced by the German government itself in an internal survey, but it was not produced to the German people. It took somebody leaking it to a journalist to get these numbers out there. And that was a pretty big bombshell. That was far higher than people expected. And the asylum seekers, specifically asylum seekers from these countries, were overrepresented in these sex crimes by a factor of about 500 to 600%, higher than their percentage in the population. And the typical explanations are, first of all, the patriarchal structures in their home countries, and the fact that women are generally treated as second-class citizens. In many of these countries, they cannot travel on their own. They need to get permission to sign documents. Marriages are often arranged, and they're often arranged between cousins. And the will and the independence of women is greatly restricted. And they don't simply, when men come into Germany, especially uneducated men who aren't very cosmopolitan, they don't simply shed these attitudes. And also their lack of German skills and their lack of understanding of the culture means that they misinterpret signals being sent by German females. But then there's also just cases of outright brutality. For instance, Berlin just released an amazing statistic. In 2023, there were 111 gang rapes in the city of Berlin alone. The youngest victim was 6. The youngest perpetrator was 12. And the number of foreigners among the perpetrators, these are people without German passports, was 54%. So, there are some cases of misunderstanding, but there are also cases of just raw, outright brutality that before this was extremely rare in Germany.
Why is it that most of all mainstream media would not report this?
Because there is a strong taboo on reporting about crime among foreigners in Germany. In fact, the German Press Ethics Code says in one of its articles that the background of any criminal should generally not be mentioned unless it's directly relevant to the reporting. Now, some German newspapers announced that they have actually decided to break away from this because they feel it's important to tell that to their people. But in general, among the mainstream politicians and NGOs, and especially professors, etc., who call themselves experts on migration, there is a very strong taboo against bringing migrants into connection with crime in any way, which is why the government keeps these data secret and why the data have to be leaked. They're often not voluntarily provided until the problem becomes too hard to ignore. Like in the most recent crime statistics in 2023, migrants were hugely overrepresented and drove double-digit increases in violent crime, and even the government had to finally admit there was a connection. But it only admits it for a couple of days, it's in the news for a while, and then it subsides because the taboo is very strong. And the taboo obviously draws in large part from Germany's experience during World War II, but an increasing number of Germans feel that that is no longer relevant to understanding what is happening in their country today.
As you said, there has been a great fear against reporting the background from fear of being seen as perhaps racist and so on. But is the media moving towards as you said, moving away from this, and this fear, doesn't it create more divide because you treat people differently, you don't hold them accountable, and so on, if you understand my question?
Yeah, I totally understand, and I think there's definitely something to that. I would cite an example, the idea being that the media has double standards about these issues. If a certain ethnic minority group commits a crime, it's underplayed. And there's actually a concrete example that really did a lot to, you could say, sort of radicalize Germans. Not radicalize, but make this problem clear. It was a horrible crime. In 2016, a young medical student named Maria Ladenberger, who was 19, she was raped and murdered by an Afghan immigrant in just a completely random crime that could have struck anyone. And the major national news broadcaster decided not to broadcast any information about this for the first several days, even though it was a huge story all over Germany because of the tragic and horrible nature of the crime. And as many, many commentators pointed out, if it had been a white German man who had gotten drunk and then raped and murdered an immigrant woman, there would have been marches and demonstrations and denunciations and, candle lighting ceremonies at the site, and every politician would have been there. And that is an accurate and fair critique. The media downplayed the Maria Ladenberger case, and eventually the main news broadcaster admitted that they had made a mistake. This was an important story, and they should have given it the attention that it deserved. And that's just one of many, many dozens of examples of news reporters being too squeamish to really state the actual facts of what is happening in Germany.
What do you predict for the future of Germany as this comes into light more and more?
The future is very hard to predict because Germany is right now in a state of political deadlock. We've got the traffic light coalition, Reds, Greens, and the yellow sort of Liberal Party. Now, during the next election, which is only in 2025, and we have to wait that long, you cannot dissolve parliament, the Conservative Party is going to get a majority. But they've already said they will not work with the right-wing AfD party. They are going to continue to cordon sanitaire, as they say. So they're not going to make a deal like happened in the Netherlands or in Sweden with the Sweden Democrats, which means that the only way the Conservatives can govern is they will have to get either the Red or the Green parties on board. And those parties have shown themselves still very resistant to strengthening immigration law. So we're going to have a situation in which, for the foreseeable future, German immigration policy will follow a course that is rejected by a large majority of Germans. We just also heard that in 2023, a record number of people were given German citizenship, 200,000. 75,000 of them were Syrians. And so these people are all now German citizens, and it is impossible to deport them, no matter what they might do here in Germany. And this is just exactly the opposite of what most Germans want. They want stricter controls, more deportations, and less grants of citizenship. But the politics is simply not in a position to give them what they want. They can only get minor incremental reforms that don't address the heart of the issue. So I think there's going to be increasing tension and an increasing sense of disparity between the public will and the political will.
Thank you, Andrew Hammel, lawyer, journalist, and author, for being here at Riks Europe today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.